Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Rumudamo wash processed Ethiopia from Terraform Coffee Roasters. There's the bag right there. And Terraform, based out of Shanghai, China, and this is their second ever appearance on this channel, having previously reviewed the LRL, a wash processed Honduran coffee, earlier this year. And I was excited to find out that Airworks was bringing in Terraform, given that we had a pretty positive experience with that coffee. Couple that with the fact that it is still pretty difficult to acquire Chinese-based coffee roasters in the United States. And not only was I interested in purchasing this coffee, we also acquired a couple of their other offerings as well. So I'm looking forward to discussing all of them, beginning with this one, as this right here is day 45. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, it is in line with our previous experience with Terraform, which was definitely on the lighter side of things, especially relative to a lot of the coffee roasters we've had from Asian-based coffee roasters. That includes the vast majority of things that we've had from Japan as well as Korea. And even then, I would still say that this one probably aligns with being on the more light side of things. It's a very light coffee in general, and a very similar profile to the one that we'd reviewed from them earlier. So that's all to say that this is very light by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 18, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the most noticeable aspect of this cup was that it was cleaner than anticipated with a focus on the citric attributes. The listed lemon definitely felt apt in a defined but sweeter sense, complemented by some slight bergamot and savory tea-like qualities as well. Nice start all around, as I didn't have any grievances with this first impression. I said, okay, it'll be very interesting to see where this coffee goes from here. Day 21 through the Chemex, and it was not quite as nice this time around, as there's still plenty of the notable candied lemon quality yet again, but there's a further focus on the citric qualities, including a bit of the listed bergamot, lending itself towards another nice day, but once again, pretty similar to that first try. So on day 24, we opted for the April Brewer, and it does continue to remain lemon dominant, with the citric qualities remaining the most prominent aspect. More consistency, as there's been a lot of consistency early on with this one, as it's mostly offering a sweeter quality, but still plenty of the lasting savory tea-like aspects as well. Day 27 through the V60 with Terraform's recipe, and Terraform's recipe is a lower temperature, and they go pretty low on the temperatures as well. I believe off the top of my head it's somewhere around 90 degrees Celsius, and it's the best it's been up to this point, as there's better clarity and definition to the citric tones, with them being a little bit more prominent and pronounced. The lemon remains the most dominant factor, with a lingering savory tea-like feel. And as of this moment, I feel like I've been on repeat with these first 4 days, as it continues to just skew a lot in those two specific directions. Day 30 through the Chemex with Terraform's recipe, and the cup feels like it's stagnated a little bit, as there really hasn't been any additional depth to the cup, as it continues to offer mostly that lemon forward experience with a little less intensity and definition, and little to follow after that as well. A slight quicker finish as well, not necessarily lending itself towards more depth in that regard either. So a pretty moderate day this time around. Day 33 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and it was back to being at its best. There's really nice definition to the citric qualities with a little bit more of that sweeter tone to it. That's what I keep going back to, mostly because it was a highlight of this coffee, but it's mostly because that was kind of the only highlight of this coffee. There wasn't too much else worth pulling out from this experience, as there's some slight fruit depth in a yellow and orange sense, with a slight bit of peachiness to the cup around this time. But even then, it's so subtle relative to the, we'll say, lemon dominant experience to it, as well as that slightly savory tea-like aspect coming through a little bit more in the finish. Day 37 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and it's been better relative to some of the earlier Chemex days we've had, but I feel like there was a very stark contrast to the brew method that we preferred for this one, as the V60 was just notably and significantly better on this coffee. It still seems a little bit one-dimensional, as it's very lemon forward with little to complement the rest. Some slight tea-like aspects and a softer hidden berry tone, but I decided to stick to the V60 for the final day. and back through the V60 on day 40 with our standard recipe. And it's been extremely consistent with this brew method, especially with this recipe, as there's a prominent citric quality to the cup with some really nice definition, but still lacking much outside of a slight peachiness and a slight tea-like savoriness and a very slight, we'll say, additional citric quality in that bergamot-like tone. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those. And we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. So this one was a very clean coffee for me, and I say for me because that's something we're going to discuss a little later with this one, but it did have nice clarity. It had really nice definition to it. I mean, it was very lemon forward. The lemon was about as defined and pronounced as you could expect for something that's listed this way. I think that's a note translated to something along the lines of perfuming lemon. I think that's something that they have listed on here. And you can see that given that it's just so strong, pronounced, and it feels candied in that regard too. So that's why it's scored there at that level 4, just really nice clarity in general to it. Finish level 4, once again, it has that slightly savory tea-like finish to it, but even then it's still mostly dominated by the citric tones as well. So that's also experienced within the finish, but given that there's not too much depth within this coffee, those two notes being the most defined and pronounced characteristics to it, were also the most pronounced characteristics within the finish as well. Sweetness level 4, I will give them this. That's probably the best part of this coffee, mostly because I've had so many washed Ethiopian coffees in the past that really struggle to reach above a level 3 in terms of the sweetness. This one had plenty of sweetness, which has been in line with our previous experience with the Terraform coffee we'd previously reviewed. So it was really nice, plenty of that candied lemon tone to this one, so that's probably the most enjoyable aspect for me on this one. Acidity level 4, and even then there wasn't much depth and variety to the acidity, as well as it was just very citric bright in that sense as well. That one was pretty direct, pretty straightforward as well, but plenty of it yet again. Citrus fruit level 4, and I honestly could have put this one as high as level 5, mostly because the lemon tone just seemed to kind of dominate a lot of the other aspects within this coffee. It was the most pronounced, it was very well defined, and it was pretty prominent. I think the only reason it scores that level 4 and maybe not higher is because we've had some maybe overly intense citric coffees in the past. But even then, perhaps a higher side of level 4 on that one for this coffee. And then we have a couple of level 3s. We will start with the florality level 3. Honestly, a generic florality, the best thing I could come up with was a little bit more of a citric floral component within this one. And I didn't even mention it throughout, mostly because it was still so subtle relative to the other tones that were present within this coffee. Even then, softer white flowers may be a little bit more prominent and present, but even then, once again, not anything that was, we'll say, anywhere near the savory and citric tones within this coffee. Savoriness level 3, that's the other thing I've been mentioning, and that is the tea-like quality that is present within this one. I feel like they have some sort of tea-like note. I can't recall off the top of my head, but it would make a lot of sense given that that was the only other experience that we had in any bit of a notable abundance within this one. Then two final things worth discussing. We'll discuss them real quick, starting with the bitterness at the level 2. Yeah, given that there's so much lemon within this one, you could expect at least a little bit of bitterness to it, but I feel like some others may have gotten a little bit more harshness in terms of that specific bitterness than we experienced from this coffee. And then final thing worth discussing, body level 2. It is a wash processed Ethiopian coffee, so I was fully expecting it to have a lighter body. And once again, we're kind of skewing a little bit more on the tea-like side of things. This one did have a pretty delicate body in general. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I will actually start with my thoughts on this one because I thought that this one was fine. I've already kind of mentioned it going through the notes that it was a little bit more one-dimensional than I was hoping for or expecting with this coffee. I'd heard so many positive things about Rumudamo last year for it being the best wash-processed Ethiopian coffee, but I feel like people weren't quite as high on it this year, and I feel like that translated to this one, as this one wasn't necessarily to the expectations that I'd had for it going into it. But what's much more interesting than that is the contrast I've heard from a lot of people about this coffee. Is a number of people said that there was a harshness to it. They had a lot of issues working with this coffee, and they were getting a lot of, we'll say, undesirable characteristics to it, including maybe some metallic components, some just additional, more harsh aspects within this one. And I would say that I think, fortunately for me, I didn't experience those qualities. I had actually a quick conversation with Jacob about this coffee, and I said, I'm not getting these things. The thing that I'm getting is that it's a little bit too one-dimensional for my liking. So I didn't experience too much of that harshness. I didn't experience too many of those adverse effects within this one, but I feel like a lot of other people did have those results. As I heard as well, that some of these coffees did have this issue, but some of them didn't. So that's tricky in itself because it's really hard to figure out who got what and what was the result of it and what was maybe a brewing error or brewing issue. But for me, it was fine. But once again, not necessarily to the expectation I'd had given the very positive experience I'd had with their first coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you enjoy your candied lemon, this one's about as candied lemon forward as possible. It's got really nice clarity. It's got really nice sweetness. I have to point to those two things at start. In addition to that, plenty of brightness as well. There are some traits and characteristics to it. They're just really concentrated and focused in those specific aspects. So if you like all of those things, then this one's a really nice fit for you because it offers so many of those in abundance. That's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards for this one and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Rumudamo wash processed Ethiopia from Terraform Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.